Hey everybody, welcome to Bible class. Now today we're going to get into discussing what I'm going to call Jacob's shepherding years. So let's see what that's about. So on Sunday, if you remember, we talked quite a bit about the value of water and how water was essentially as valuable as gold. And then we talked a little bit about the fact that Jacob was going to a place called Padan Aram in a city called Haran, which is where his to-be father-in-law Laban lived. Now, if you remember, I said something about the fact that water was so valuable that the people would sometimes cover up a well with a stone. Do you remember? Well, that actually has a lot to do with how Jacob met his future wife, Rachel. He came to the place where there were shepherds gathered around a well, but they weren't watering the flocks. And he said, why aren't you watering your flocks? He said, well, we wait till everybody gets here and then we uncover the well. We take the stone off of the well. And then we water the sheep all at the same time. But Rachel came up and Jacob uncovered the well. He moved the stone off and let Rachel water her sheep. That's kind of how they met. So that really sort of began Jacob's tenure, his time as a shepherd. He worked for Laban for 14 years, 7 years twice, to marry Rachel and Leah. And then he worked for another 6 years really to get what became his wages. So I want you to listen. This is from Genesis chapter 30. Verse 25 through 36. I want you to listen to this. This is sort of how Jacob became a shepherd and how he accumulated some of his wealth. Give this a listen.
After Rachel gave birth to Joseph, Jacob said to Laban, "Send me on my way, so I can go back to my own homeland. Give me my wives and children, for whom I have served you, and I will be on my way. You know how much work I've done for you." But Laban said to him, "If I have found favor in your eyes, please stay. I have learned by divination that the Lord has blessed me because of you." He added, "Name your wages, and I will pay them." Jacob said to him, "You know how I have worked for you, and how your livestock has fared under my care. The little you had before I came has increased greatly, and the Lord has blessed you wherever I have been. But now, when may I do something for my own household?" "What shall I give you?" he asked. "Don't give me anything," Jacob replied. "But if you will do this one thing for me, I will go on tending your flocks and watching over them. Let me go through all your flocks today and remove from them every speckled or spotted sheep, every dark-colored lamb, and every spotted or speckled goat. They will be my wages, and my honesty will testify for me in the future. Whenever you check on the wages you have paid me, any goat in my possession that is not speckled or spotted, or any lamb that is not dark-colored, will be considered stolen." "Agreed," said Laban. "Let it be as you have said." That same day he removed all the male goats that were streaked or spotted, and all the speckled or spotted female goats, all that had white on them, and all the dark-colored lambs, and he placed them in the care of his sons. Then he put a 3-day journey between himself and Jacob, while Jacob continued to tend the rest of Laban's flocks.
So it talked about how Jacob's wages, what did he say? He said the streaked, spotted, speckled, those kind of animals were going to be his wages. And then what did Laban do? That dude took all of them and sent them away a 3 days journey. So Jacob had a plan, sort of, if you will, a breeding program to help the sheep have babies that were streaked, spotted, speckled, and so forth. And it said that he actually took the wood from poplar, almond, and plane trees, and he peeled back some of the bark like this. And he actually, it says that he peeled it near the water troughs, and then he put that by the water troughs, and he actually peeled the bark into the water troughs. So I put some bark in this water. You can see the water's not clear anymore. It looks kind of gross. But have you ever had tea? If you make tea, it starts out as clear water, and then you dip the leaves in it. We call it steeping. But you dip the leaves into the water, and the water turns brown. It changes the water from just water into tea. One thing that's interesting about tea, there are different kinds of teas. We call them herbal teas. Some of them will have like a medicinal property to them. And what's fascinating is that almond and poplar trees, both of them are like a medicinal tea that you can create with mixing them in water that actually helps sheep to have babies. So it's almost like a medicine that he was making for these animals. It's kind of fascinating. But there came a point when, I think it was almost 6 years later, Jacob had accumulated a fair amount of wealth, and it was time for him to leave. Now this, I want you to listen to this. This comes from Genesis chapter 31, verse 3 through 18. So give this a listen.
Then the Lord said to Jacob, "Go back to the land of your fathers and to your relatives, and I will be with you." So Jacob sent word to Rachel and Leah to come out to the fields where his flocks were. He said to them, "I see that your father's attitude toward me is not what it was before, but the God of my father has been with me. You know that I've worked for your father with all my strength, yet your father has cheated me by changing my wages 10 times. However, God has not allowed him to harm me. If he said, 'The speckled ones will be your wages,' then all the flocks gave birth to speckled young. And if he said, 'The streaked ones will be your wages,' then all the flocks bore streaked young. So God has taken away your father's livestock and has given them to me. In breeding season, I once had a dream in which I looked up and saw that the male goats were mating with the flock, were streaked, speckled, or spotted. The angel of God said to me in the dream, 'Jacob.' I answered, 'Here I am.' And he said, 'Look up and see that all the male goats mating with the flock are streaked, speckled, or spotted, for I have seen all that Laban has done to you. I am the God of Bethel, where you anointed a pillar, and where you made a vow to me. Now leave this land at once, and go back to your native land.' Then Rachel and Leah replied, 'Do we still have any share in the inheritance of our father's estate? Does he not regard us as foreigners? Not only has he sold us, but he has used up what has been paid for us. Surely all the wealth that God took away from our father belongs to us and our children. So do whatever God has told you.' Then Jacob put his children and his wives on camels, and he drove all his livestock ahead of him, along with all the goods he had accumulated in Paddan Aram, to go to his father Isaac in the land of Canaan."
So, Jacob, he had all of his wealth, and he was like, we've got to go. God actually called him and said, it's time for you to return back home, even going to Bethel, where he had anointed. He set up the stone, and he anointed it with oil and said, this is the house of God. Bet, house, El, God, right? So, he starts heading back, and the question that I have is kind of interesting, is how could he just pick up and move like that? I mean, I live in a house. You could see the walls behind me, the walls around me. I'm stationary. I can't just pick up and move. It's quite a process. Well, he was a shepherd. What did shepherds live in? Did they live in houses like this? No. Now, houses sort of like this were available. They were solid, maybe stone more than wood, but they were solid structures that were permanent. You didn't pick them up and move. But Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, they actually lived in tents. Look at this. This is a picture of a like a Bedouin type shepherd, somebody who lives in the Middle East, and they are a shepherd. This is kind of one of their tents. There's a couple of them that you can see. And whenever we read Genesis 31:25, it says Jacob had pitched his tent in the hill country of Gilead. Obviously, he was living in tents. So something like this. Now, these are kind of interesting. The tent dwellers, people who lived in tents, they made them out of woven strips of coarse goat skin, which is kind of interesting. It was literally like a leather kind of a structure. Now, it didn't necessarily rain very often, but they made these tent structures waterproof by putting the goat hides into water and then drying them. And that would actually make them waterproof because they would shrink up and then they wouldn't be porous anymore. And then the goat hair, this skin, was stretched over the top of 3 rows of wooden poles. You can kind of tell in those pictures. And then they had, pegs and poles and stakes and all these things that would just hold it down. And then inside the tent, there was kind of a curtain that divided, and they would have one side for the women and children and one side for men. And inside of a tent, they would do all of their cooking and this kind of a thing. So they would all sleep on one side or the other. The women and children and the men, they would sleep in various sides of the tent. Now inside, they would have straw mats and woven rugs, maybe some camel hair type cushions. They'd have cooking items, things like that, and they would have clay pots. Like here's a picture of clay pots. Oftentimes they would carry actually a goat skin water bag. Here's a picture of that. It's kind of funny looking, but it's just a leather bag that they would carry water in. They would have oil lamps like this. This is the kind of thing you think of whenever they say you've got to rub the lamp and a genie will come out. This is the kind of lamp that they're talking about. Of course, genies don't actually come out of them. But those are kind of the ideas. These things could all be packed up and moved very quickly and very easily. Lamps are kind of an interesting. They were filled with olive oil, and they had a wick that came out, and it was soaked in that olive oil. So it was the oil that burned, not the wick. And they would burn continually. Apparently, it was considered a disgrace to let an oil lamp burn out. So they believed that light was indicative of the presence of God. So for those of you that were involved in winter camp, you remember that light and God are very close together, and Jesus is the light, right? So all of these different things they would have with their tents, and for protection, they would have sort of a caravan, a whole bunch of tents that might be camped together. They would be set up in a semicircle or a full circle, and they would keep their livestock in the middle so that they could protect everything, and they could sleep at night and not have to worry too much about the sheep. So when I think Jacob made this decision, along with his mother, to trick Isaac, his father, in order to basically swindle his brother out of the blessing that he got, it resulted in him sort of becoming exiled. He had to leave his homeland and go to Padan Aram, where he was not from. For 20 years he was there. And so for somebody who was, if you remember, he liked to live among the tents. And Esau was the one that liked the outdoors. And now suddenly he's a shepherd. That's where you go, is all outdoors. Quite a change for him. And they would build these temporary tents, and they're out in the fields tending to their flocks, and it was how they lived. It was oftentimes a very flimsy kind of a tent. They came apart quickly because they were nomadic. They moved all the time, and in fact, they came apart so quickly that there was a phrase that they would say, it was like a shepherd's tent. It was done really quickly, or just you and me, we might say, it was done in a flash, or quick as a wink, like a shepherd's tent. It's very quick. So I think it's interesting to look at the account in Scripture of all the things that happened in Jacob's life. Of course, we only talked about a little bit of it today, and how the wages back and forth, and he fled from Laban, and the trickery of his father. He did some things that I would say they weren't super honest. Nevertheless, God was with him, and God took care of him. And I think what's important for us to know God is always there for us. Yes, He absolutely wants us to obey Him. He absolutely wants us to follow His commandments. But He also knows that you and me, just like Jacob did, are going to fall short of His glory. That is why He sent His Son, Jesus, into this world. Jesus came, He lived a very much perfect, sinless, blameless life. No problem. He's the only one who could do it. And He lived that life to be an example to us, and so He could lay it down as an atoning sacrifice to pay for our sins, so that where we fall short, He could fill in the gaps, and that we can be perfect in God's sight if we follow Jesus. And I am so very thankful for that. So we're going to keep studying about Jacob and how he lived and the things that he did in his life. But I hope that you found some of this interesting to kind of think about what was life like maybe as a shepherd and how he was able to make a medicinal tea to make sure his flocks were healthy and having the speckled and spotted sheeps and so forth. But nevertheless, I hope that you will choose to follow God so that Jesus can fill in where you are lacking, just like He has done for me. Thanks for coming to Bible class, and I hope to see you again on Sunday.